the 11th of July 1944, a hedgerow field near Carentan. A German gunner sights Americans in the open and chooses silence over fire. He lay behind the fastest-firing infantry weapon of the war, fingers poised on the trigger. His assistant gunner held a second belt ready. 400 yards away, American infantry crossed a pasture in clear view. The field of fire was perfect. The gun was loaded. The crew was unseen. And yet, they did not fire. In that breathless moment, something larger than fear held their hands. It was the weight of a new reality. The sound that once froze entire platoons in the mud had become the sound that summoned their own destruction. This is the story of a weapon feared across continents, and of the American system that taught its crews to fear the first burst. The MG42 fired 20 rounds each second. To American ears, it was not a pattern of shots, but a single ripping scream, the tearing of a bedsheet across the sky. In the first weeks after D-Day, men pressed their faces into Norman earth and refused to move when they heard it. Company commanders saw soldiers halt at the edge of open ground, rather than face a field watched by that muzzle. Then the battlefield changed. It did not change through a new machine or an unseen technology. It changed because of the way American infantry fought back. To understand why a trained German crew with a perfect shot chose silence, we must see what two armies believed about killing power. The German squad was a machine gun and its servants, riflemen with bolt-action Kar 9.8s guarded, fed, and moved the gun. Without it, the squad was a body without a spine. The American squad was different. It was built around the individual rifleman. 12 men with M1 Garands, the only standard-issue semi-automatic rifle in any major army of the war, backed by a Browning automatic rifle. This mattered in a way no manual fully guessed until the crucible of Normandy. When a German machine gun fired on an American squad, the answer was not a handful of spaced rifle shots. It was 13 weapons trained on a single flash within seconds. It was a wall of semi-automatic fire that did not scission. It was the first layer of a new dilemma. 7 months earlier, the change had been written in stone and blood on a rocky terrace in Italy, the 15th of December 1943, south slope of Monte Sammucro, above San Pedro in Fine. A German crew from the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division had a textbook position. 2 machine guns in interlocking fire, mortar coordinates pre-registered. Twice they had cut apart attacks by sending the Americans to ground, then holding them there. On the third attack, the pattern shattered in 93 seconds. At 300 yards, the MG opened. 7 Americans hit the dirt behind a low wall. Then they returned fire. Not 1 or 2. All of them. The gunner heard a continuous rolling crack from semi-automatic rifles, a sound he had never heard from enemy riflemen before. Dust jumped from stone. Chips stung his face. He could not lift his head to re-aim. The assistant gunner tried to shift the belt. A round struck the tripod. Another snapped past his ear. He pressed himself flat. Then the mortars arrived. A 60mm team had watched the flash and dropped rounds within 15 seconds. Right, short, then on the terrace. The weapon that dominated 4 years of infantry combat fell silent in the time it takes water to simmer. This was not luck. It was doctrine. American riflemen were trained to answer fire with fire instantly and personally. No request, no hesitation. Find the flash, aim, pull the trigger. The M1 Garand made that instinct lethal. But rifles and mortars were only the opening minutes. Behind them stood a chain that turned a single muzzle flash into a sentence. The link was a man few people remember. The forward observer. He walked with the infantry, radio on his back, connected to the fire direction center. He did not send a request up a chain and wait. He called a target. The fire direction center computed data for every battery within range and fired, not in 10 or 20 minutes. In minutes that could be counted against a heartbeat, 3 minutes. That was the number that mattered to a machine gun crew. From the moment an observer saw a flash to the moment 18 high-explosive shells from an artillery battalion fell on that position. 3 minutes. The 24th of January 1944, on the Rapido River, the lesson was carved into the hillside. A veteran German crew fired a 2-second burst and began to displace. On the Eastern Front, that technique had saved their lives. This time, an American observer read the map, spoke 6 words into a radio, and 107 seconds later, 54 rounds of 105mm high explosive erased the primary position, the alternate, and the trench between them. The men were trained for a slow war. The war that had found them was fast. In Normandy, the terrain seemed to erase these advantages. The hedgerows were walls of earth and root, 4 feet thick at the base, grown since before Napoleon. Light barely passed through. The MG42 fired through a foot-wide slot screened by brush. The flash could not be seen beyond 50 yards. Rifle fire disappeared into dirt and timber. Artillery burned itself against the tops of hedges. Tanks that tried to climb were gutted by a single Panzerfaust. Tanks that stayed on roads were trapped by a single gun. The system that silenced the gun in Italy faltered in the Bocage. For weeks, German company commanders spoke with a new confidence. One crew could hold a field for hours. Artillery could not strike what it could not see. They believed the problem would stand still. It did not. In farmyards and open fields behind the lines, sergeants and tankers taught each other. Forward observers learned to crawl close enough to pinpoint a slot in a hedge, and in the yard of a farmhouse near Columbia, a cavalry sergeant named Curtis Culin looked at German beach obstacles and saw a way through the walls themselves. He cut the steel hedgehogs into prongs, welded them to a crossbar, then to the front of a Sherman. The device weighed about 100 pounds. At 10 miles per hour, those teeth bit the hedge, kept the belly down, and pushed through. The tank came out level, gun ready, armor forward. Omar Bradley watched and ordered every available Sherman fitted. By Operation Cobra, most of First Army's tanks wore tusks. Soldiers called them rhinos. The rhino was the key. The weapon was the system that followed it through. The 26th of July, 1944, east of Marigny. A German crew waited in a classic setup. 1 field, 1 slot, coordinates ready. A grinding engine. Then the wall shook. A Sherman burst through with its gun already hunting. The gunner's choice was no choice at all. Fire at the infantry and reveal the muzzle to the tank. Fire at the tank and watch rounds bounce like gravel. Stay silent and face grenades and automatic rifles at close range. He fired. The Sherman's gunner saw the flash, traversed, and sent a 75mm high-explosive shell into the embankment 3 feet above the slot. The MG position vanished in earth and timber. The second gun held its fire. The crew pressed into the dirt and did not touch the trigger. Across 100 Norman fields in the last week of July, hunters became hunted. The machine was simple: a tank to break the wall and draw the fire, infantry to flank and clear, a forward observer beside them ready to summon an artillery battalion on any position that held. Each depended on the others. Alone, each was vulnerable. Together, they consumed fields at a pace defenders could not match. And the Americans did something else. They taught it laterally. A company in one division discovered a method, and within days a 1-page mimeographed sheet with plain language and a hand-drawn diagram reached other divisions. 5 days from invention to adoption in the middle of a war, German non-commissioned officers improvised brilliantly, but their innovations died where they were born. The connective tissue between units was shattered. The hierarchy did not reward lateral sharing. Experienced leaders fell faster than they could be replaced. The American system harvested every successful idea and spread it faster than countermeasures could arrive. The adjustment that saved one hedge became obsolete when the next assault used a variation that had already been learned from another fight. Then came the verdict on open ground. The 7th of August, 1944, near Mortar. 4 Panzer divisions drove west to cut the breakout. By dawn, 700 men of the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry, held Hill 317 surrounded. No tanks, no resupply. They had forward observers with radios. When German machine gun crews set up around the hill, fields of fire perfect and targets visible, they did not fire. Every time a weapon barked, the hill spoke back. 12.5 artillery battalions were concentrated into a wall of high explosive. Approximately 225 guns answered the map coordinates of a handful of lieutenants lying in the dirt. Crews that fired were silenced within minutes. Crews that moved were tracked and hit again. Crews that waited for nights met mortars pre-registered in the quiet hours. There was no safe moment. A captured non-commissioned officer from the 2nd Panzer Division said his gunner refused to fire for an entire day. They had targets and orders. He did not press the trigger. They had watched a crew 40 meters to their right open up and cease to exist 90 seconds later. The backbone of German infantry sat loaded, aimed at Americans in the open, and crews chose silence. Layer by layer, the system had made that silence rational. The M1 Garand answered in seconds. The 60mm mortars answered within half a minute. The forward observer and the fire direction center answered within 3 minutes. The Rhino tanks came through the walls. The lessons learned system adapted faster than the enemy could. Each layer alone could be survived. Together, they could not. The weapon never changed. The world around it did. By autumn, captured soldiers called the MG a curse. A machine gun crew was a death sentence. Men volunteered for anything rather than sit behind the beacon. Every American rifle, mortar, tank, and artillery battery was trained to find and destroy. In a hedgerow field near Carentan, a young gunner and his assistant looked across 400 yards of open ground and chose to live. Curtis Culin, the sergeant who built the Rhino from German scrap, did not see the breakout his idea made possible. He received the Legion of Merit, then lost his right leg to a mine in the Hürgen forest. He returned home to New Jersey and a quiet life. Down the line, the 700 on Hill 317 were relieved on August 12th after calling more than 18,000 rounds of artillery. 357 were killed or wounded. They received a Presidential Unit citation. The observers received their pay and moved on. The answer is simple in the end, because the path to it is long. American troops made German machine gunners afraid to fire first by building a system where every trigger pull summoned their own destruction. It was not genius. It was not luck. It was the relentless will of an army that refused to accept a problem it could not solve. The MG42 remained deadly. But in the summer of 1944, the deadliest thing about it was pulling the trigger.